This is a statement from the FCCT, the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand. This is all of the Western media organizations all gathered together in Thailand. This is their statement about the March 20th protests in Bangkok, violent protests, violent anti-government protests. They're saying this is their statement on journalists injured by police rubber bullets. They're saying they are very concerned by the injuries inflicted by rubber bullets on several journalists covering the protests around Sanam Luang on Saturday night. The police used water cannon, tear gas, and rubber bullets to disperse the protesters. And they're saying they fully support the points raised by these media organizations. And the FCCT urge the Thai authorities to recognize that journalists covering the protests are doing their jobs and should not be targeted. There is zero evidence provided by the FCCT that the Thai police deliberately targeted journalists. Zero evidence. And here are the points that the FCCT supports. People have the right under a democratic system to protest peacefully without provocation, weapons, or the use of force. And of course, this is them pretending as if the protests weren't violent from the very beginning. They were. The police must take action step by step when dispersing protests and must clearly inform the protesters and the media in advance about the steps to be taken to avoid violence. The police did that all night long. They constantly warned the journalists, the media, to get out of the way, to get behind police lines. Here is footage from Khalsa English. This is opposition media owned by the US-backed billionaire opposition leader Thanathorn and his family. This is Khalsa English and Prawit explaining what the police are warning everyone about and openly defying them. And the police even at one point force him to get behind their lines, and then he sneaks around to get out amongst the protesters again anyway.
Police, there are a lot of press covering. The press are not going home despite the police having told us about nearly half an hour ago that we should all go home, which is the most irresponsible things to say. Now that's a very loud, explosive thrown by
the demonstrators.
Okay. They're asked to go behind the line. You have no choice, but you could see a lot of weapons. Okay, this is the best we could do for the meantime. Okay, Tapanai, we might want to walk to the other side. Come, follow me. Okay, we're going to cross to the other side quietly. We're going to walk through Khalsan Road to the demonstrator side because there's no point being stuck behind. เดี๋ยวเราจะเดินลัดถนนข้าวสารนะครับต่อข้าวสารกลับไปทางผู้ชุมนุมนะครับ
So if he were hit by a rubber bullet, who is to blame? The Royal Thai police who warned him and even physically moved him behind their lines to protect him, or Prawit and other media who refused to listen to the warnings? And then here, 3 and 4, the media themselves should follow the set guidelines. Yeah, exactly. And they didn't, and that's why they got hit by rubber bullets, not because the police were targeting journalists. The FCCT would like to draw attention to the United Nations guidelines on the use of non-lethal force. That's interesting, because so do I. I want to draw attention to that as well. But let's see what the FCCT's point is. The use of less lethal weapons to disperse an assembly is an indiscriminate tactic and should only be considered a last resort. Dispersal may be considered where violence is serious, which on March 20th it was, and widespread, which it was, and represents an imminent threat to bodily integrity or property, which it did, and where law enforcement officials have exhausted all reasonable measures to facilitate the assembly and protect participants from harm. Not only did the Royal Thai Police exhaust all reasonable measures, they also used completely unreasonable measures. They had a barricade 2 shipping containers tall across the entire venue. The Western media has repeatedly mocked the Thai police for using these barricades, saying that it's overkill, that it's too much. Well, obviously it wasn't enough, because the violent mob came to that protest venue so determined to fight with the police that even that barricade was not enough to separate the police and the protesters. They tore down the containers, and then they immediately started attacking the police. Now let's go to the UN Human Rights guidance on less lethal weapons in law enforcement. This is about, they're calling it kinetic impact projectiles, rubber bullets, and they should be used in the lower abdomen or legs and at a violent individual, and only with a view to addressing an imminent threat of injury to either a law enforcement official or a member of the public. So these protesters throwing bricks, glass bottles, bombs, Molotov cocktails, that is definitely the threat of imminent injury.
Rubber bullet gun. He said, for those throwing things at us, used a special gadget or tool, and that's a code for rubber bullet.
And so the police were using rubber bullets, exactly as the UN's guidelines lay out. What is the FCCT doing then here in Thailand? What are these Western media organizations doing? Are they objectively reporting on events here in Thailand as journalists? Or are they driving events here in Thailand in support of the anti-government protests and as foreign agents? If foreign media organizations were doing this in the UK or in the US, they would be thrown out of the country immediately. They would have their visas taken and they would be deported and they would be blacklisted from ever entering the country again. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing to the channel. It's free to do and it helps the channel grow. Look in the video description for ways you can help support my work so that I can continue doing videos like this. And as always, thank you for watching.